I've long held the opinion that Jurassic Park is Spielberg's best directed movie on a technical level. While Spielberg has certainly made better movies, I believe Jurassic Park is the best example of all of his technical skills as a filmmaker rolled into one movie. Not just in using the visual effects in a smart and economical way, but also with careful camera blocking and staging. All this results in some of the most thrilling action set pieces you'll ever find in a movie. Spielberg is by far one of the best action directors we've ever had. James Cameron and George Miller are two others who come to mind, who managed to stay in the same league. And there are lots of good action directors, but what separates Spielberg from the pack is his ability to truly utilize the visual language of the medium to deliver maximum suspense and thrills. Now, don't get me wrong. I enjoy the action work of other directors, like the Wachowskis or Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, even Sam Raimi and Robert Rodriguez. But they tend to fetishize action to the point where, at least for me, I don't get the same visceral emotional reaction as I do with Spielberg's action moments. I think there's a reason for this. Spielberg is somehow able to tap into the primal nature of our lizard brains and use archetypal elements to create action sequences that are incredibly effective on a visceral level. These ancient primal archetypes are utilized in the opening sequence of Jurassic Park in order to induce maximum suspense. So the first thing we see in the movie is a calm shot of trees, highlighted with an eerie, almost misty glow. The calm stillness is immediately punctuated by movement. The trees sway back and forth in a wild manner, as if something huge is traversing them. This is reinforced by a low rumbling sound, and what sounds like a wild animal cry in the distance. In a lizard brain sense, this is a primal moment that immediately starts working us on a visceral gut level. We already know the movie is about dinosaurs, so these kinds of moments may seem inconsequential, but they are incredibly important. They are working on a part of the brain that we're not really aware of, the part that makes us sweat, get chills, makes our heart beat faster. We don't know why we feel this way consciously, but filmmakers carefully plan and craft moments that trigger these kinds of reactions. This first shot speaks to the audience on a primal evolutionary level. During the days when humans lived in the bush and foraged for food, this kind of situation would alert us that something dangerous is lurking, and the fight or flight response would kick in. Spielberg understands this and is utilizing it early on. Now here, Spielberg could have cut to more shots of trees, maybe a dinosaur eye, heavy breathing, but instead he cuts to this shot, a close-up of a man with a worried look on his face. But why? Well, Spielberg has already shown us what we should be worried about. Not much else is needed to trigger the primal part of the brain. Dark, creepy, rustling trees, low rumbling sound, worried human face. Simple and effective. Here he's showing us the human element, something the audience can relate to, and as a result align with emotionally. This is exactly the kind of economic storytelling that Spielberg is famous for. He utilizes the medium in such a way that allows the power of images to do most of the work. Instead of over-directing scenes, he almost under-directs them. By that I mean he makes the audience participants in the storytelling. This is significant because people feel empowered when they're asked to participate, even if they're only aware of it on a subconscious level. It makes them feel good. Less is more, but other films tend to take on a more is more approach, and as a result feel empty and soulless. These films bludgeon the audience into submission rather than respecting them as participants in the storytelling. Instead of engaging the mind, they encourage the mind to shut itself off. Next, we cut back to what the worried man is looking at, the tree line, but this time the movement of the trees is far more violent and the rumbling sound a lot more intense. Spielberg continues to be economical in his shot selection. What seems like the same shot is actually very different. This time, notice the composition of the shot. It's a lower angle and the shot is wider, including more tree line. Low-angle shots are used to give whatever is in the shot greater power or importance. It makes the audience feel smaller, so whatever is in the shot automatically seems bigger. In a primal sense, this shot continues to ramp up the suspense, because it makes whatever is lurking in the trees seem absolutely massive and very dangerous. Now, those who have seen Jurassic Park know this scene involves a velociraptor, which is one of the smallest dinosaurs. So why is Spielberg creating the impression of something huge? Well, first of all, movies are about impressions, and filmmakers often forego the literal for the metaphorical in order to create a sum that is greater than the individual parts. This is key for suspense, and Spielberg is continuing to work the primal part of the mind rather than the conscious. This shot, with its low angle, more violent movement, intense rumble, and now even more mystical light pouring in, all work to create quite an impression. And realize, we are only 3 shots into this sequence, and already there has been a lot of information communicated. This is what I mean by economical storytelling. It's more efficient, and as a result, ends up being more effective in getting us involved in the story. Continuing to build the sequence from the previous shots, Spielberg begins to expand the environment and give us an idea of what's actually happening by cutting to these men. There are several different things to notice about this shot compared to the previous shot of the lone man. First off, the Jurassic Park logo, which was previously unseen, is now visible on the men's helmets. This clues us into the fact that they are park workers, here to deal with whatever situation is unfolding. In an economical storytelling sense, Spielberg gives only the necessary information in each shot. In the shot of the lone man, all we needed to see was his worried face. In this wider shot of the group, we need to begin to understand the situation more, so showing the helmets with the Jurassic Park logo is a simple way of doing that. Notice the man in the middle. Spielberg makes him stand out by placing him in the middle of the frame, defiantly chewing gum and scowling. What seems like a throwaway moment is actually very important. And it's actually connected to events that happen later in the film. Jurassic Park will come to be known as a place that isn't necessarily beneficial for or even friendly towards the dinosaurs. Aside from this opening sequence, Spielberg was very careful not to portray them as typical movie monsters. Instead, remembering that they are simple wild animals, reacting to being thrown out of history. And John Hammond is portrayed as someone who seems more concerned with, like Ian Malcolm says,
"But your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should."
It makes the audience somewhat sympathetic to the dinosaurs. The defiant man in this shot is a visual precursor that begins to build on this idea that Jurassic Park isn't the friendly, ethically sound place Hammond would like people to believe. Again, this is economical storytelling that maximizes every moment in every shot. Nothing goes to waste. We cut back to the chaos in the trees, but here Spielberg does something very clever and very effective. It is actually easy to miss. He cuts away from this shot, just as some large dark shape reveals itself. You can kind of see it here. Again, we all know we're watching a movie about dinosaurs, but these kinds of ambiguous impressions go a long way in keeping the audience participating in the events. You almost have to force yourself to pay more attention, lean forward a little more. Here, Spielberg employs his first dolly shot, as he introduces this man, Robert Muldoon, who stands out from the group in several ways. Most obviously, he's dressed differently. He also has a shotgun, a serious piece of weaponry, along with what looks like tasers carried by the other men. Strongly suggests whatever's coming is extremely dangerous. But visually, the most important aspect may be the slow dolly of the camera and a slight low angle. This low angle matches the previous low angle of the tree line. Visually, this links the two shots together. It suggests that Muldoon is somehow connected to whatever is in the tree line. Later on, we'll come to learn of Muldoon's emotional connection to the velociraptor. The low angle of these two shots is a clever way to visually begin to link them together, and this duplicating of shots of Muldoon and the raptor will repeat itself later in the sequence. And notice the look on his face. Not of fear, like the first man, or defiance, like the second man, but one of focus and determination, and extreme caution. This establishes Muldoon as someone who greatly respects whatever it is he's dealing with. All this, his attitude, the duplicate low angle, the dolly in, there's a lot of information being communicated to us in a single shot, and up to this point, Spielberg has extracted every ounce of tension from this scene in just a few shots. This is the most interesting shot in the entire sequence for me. It's a long, continuous shot that starts below the men, keeping the container in a powerful low angle as it's being hauled in, bright lights shining into the lens of the camera. The container almost seemingly hovering above the group, but then the camera slowly starts to dolly forward and past the men, focusing on the container as it pivots and comes to a rest in front of a containment area. Spielberg basically uses the container to transition us into an establishing shot of the base, while keeping the tonal qualities of the container intact. Now we cut to a point of view shot from inside the container, and on the soundtrack we hear a low animalistic breathing sound, both being pretty standard monster movie techniques, but it works, so why not use it? Spielberg effectively employed several POV shots of the shark in Jaws to suggest the threat without showing it, and make the audience somewhat of a participant in the action. But in Jurassic Park, this shot begins to establish a relationship between whatever's in the container and Muldoon, since it's watching him in particular. And remember the two low-angle shots earlier that linked them together. This continues the idea while also separating Muldoon from the other men, as a way to make him stand out. Here, Spielberg employs a lateral tracking shot, following the leading team as Muldoon orders them to the container. It begins a series of lateral angles that suggest an adversarial relationship between Muldoon and whatever is in the container. Lateral angles, especially when cutting back and forth, tend to suggest ideas or characters being at odds with one another. Visually, they place the two things on opposite ends, both literally and metaphorically. The lateral tracking shot here allows Spielberg to hint at this relationship, using the men as a transition device between Muldoon and the container, to suggest it is Muldoon versus the raptor, since that relationship has already been established visually in the previous shots. And, of course, later on, this adversarial relationship fully reveals itself. One of the men is spooked, giving Muldoon an edge of superiority, since, in the previous POV shot, Muldoon seemed unafraid of the creature. Then Spielberg cuts to a lateral shot of Muldoon continuing to build the adversarial relationship. And notice how he's slightly obscured in shadow, with blinding light accenting his figure. This is a pretty clever way to visually add mystique to Muldoon's character. And notice here, as the men start sliding the container forward, we are behind Muldoon in the shot as the container is slid into position. The long focal length of the lens compressing Muldoon and the container together as it is slid across his body. It's a subtle metaphorical moment that visually predicts their inevitable violent confrontation. Everyone has their weapons drawn on edge. Spielberg employs this third POV shot from the creature as Muldoon orders the loading team away. This is important because the raptor is one of the more intelligent dinosaurs, but we don't necessarily know it at this point. Spielberg could have shown this moment from any of these other angles. But from this shot, it suggests the animal is studying Muldoon's methods in order to figure out how to escape. This will be explained later in the film as Muldoon describes the intelligent nature of the raptor. But again, this kind of economical storytelling begins to build on the idea in a visual way that works on a subconscious level. Muldoon orders the other men away and the gatekeeper in. Spielberg employs another lateral tracking shot to follow the gatekeeper to the top of the container. And notice how the shot starts from Muldoon on the left, with the camera moving from him toward the raptor. Remember, this entire sequence has been established as Muldoon versus the raptor. It's really what the scene is about. Forget the men, the container, the jungle, even the procedure of loading the animal into the containment area. This scene is purely about two forces pitted against one another, and almost every single shot up to this point has reinforced this basic idea. This is what good visual storytelling is all about. The gatekeeper is being watched, which suggests a plan is afoot, and Muldoon calls him by name when ordering him to raise the gate.
Joffrey, raise the gate!
This is important for a couple of reasons. One, he's the only character with a name at this point, and someone with a name isn't just a victim. It establishes him as a person. It's a subtle way to humanize what could potentially be just another random victim. Naming him also means Muldoon knows the man personally, and this personal connection will become important in a moment. All the suspense and tension Spielberg has built is about to pay off and explode in the following series of shots. Again, the lateral movement as the raptor attacks the gate. And here begins one of my favorite of Spielberg's techniques, and is another thing that makes the sequence so riveting. The ability to suggest action or ideas rather than show them directly. This lets the audience's mind fill in the gaps, making us participants in the events, allowing us to co-create the scene. The mind is more powerful than anything a filmmaker can show. No one can scare the audience as much as themselves, as their mind conjures up all kinds of horrible things. This technique also saves a lot of money on visual effects. So all hell breaks loose, and now Muldoon gets involved. The camera here keeping the adversarial tracking shot. Notice how much emphasis is placed on the hand. Spielberg likes to use hands to visually represent ideas. In this scene, highlighting Joffrey's hand visually suggests his predicament, while humanizing him at the same time. Since we don't know Joffrey, it's a quick, effective method to get us to care. A hand is our connection to this world. When we touch things to experience them, we don't use our head or feet, we use our hands. So the hand represents our connection to the world. Visually and quite literally, Joffrey is losing his connection to this world. Spielberg's economical compositions are continued here as we see simultaneous action happening in the same shot. In the foreground, the men trying desperately to tase the raptor into submission. And in the background, Joffrey, incredibly, lifted clear off the ground by the raptor. Next, we have another lateral tracking shot to show the sheer number of men needed to contain the situation. This shot continues to develop momentum in the sequence, but most importantly, a shot like this allows several shots to unfold without the need to cut. Spielberg likes to employ as many shots as possible in a single camera setup. This is a great way to vary the action while keeping a sense of geography, so that the audience is never confused as to where the action is taking place. Here we start with a series of extreme close-ups to close out the sequence. Spielberg cuts between the eyes of the raptor and the wild, panicked eyes of Muldoon as the men desperately work to save Joffrey. These shots linked together again work to link Muldoon and the raptor visually, paying off the connection between them in the previous shots. At this point, it should be abundantly clear as to what the scene is actually about, and why Spielberg chose to construct the sequence in this manner. This isn't just a movie about dinosaurs. There is a human element, as well as an adversarial relationship between dinosaurs and man that will become the film's focus later on. And in between these close-ups, we again have an economical shot, the men working in the foreground and Muldoon helping Joffrey in the background. This extreme close-up of Muldoon's mouth gives more importance to his order to shoot the raptor, and acts to highlight his desperation. They aren't just words, they're the cries of a desperate man. This also acts to humanize Joffrey even further, as it's a life Muldoon is trying to save and not just some random dinosaur fodder. And then we come back to the hand motif, Joffrey's hand slowly slipping through Muldoon's grasp. This is a visual representation of life slowly being pulled away. This is much more effective than, say, slowly and methodically showing the man's legs being eaten off in a bloody fashion. Spielberg's method, again, retains the human element. This sequence is a highlight for me in a movie full of great sequences, and it becomes clear that Spielberg is in a class of his own when it comes to building suspenseful, thrilling action sequences that are economical, build character, and allow the minds of the audience to co-create the sequence for a more satisfying experience. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.